So we're here with Evan Law of OCC Community College, American football player, exceptional talent, so scouts be on the lookout for this guy. What we're going to be going through and just encapsulated in a short video here is the dynamics of the sprint action, how the muscles are behaving, and the implications on training as far as exercises go and so on. Alright, so we'll get in the acceleration position. Just hold it for a second to begin to. I like to utilize external resistance as a means of demonstrating to athletes the dynamics of how the muscles operate in different aspects of the sprint position. So here we have a heavily loaded prowler. An exercise per se is not going to be performed with it. It's so the athlete and anyone watching can feel the influence of the musculature that is operating when your body is in different positions. All right. So in the early acceleration position, go ahead. If we're talking about coming out of a low start, whether it's a block start or out of a 3.40-yard stance, we're looking for this complete line of extension from ankle through the shoulder. So let's stand up. Now, if he was to start pushing this over the course of a few strides, it's immediately and predominantly going to be felt through the quadriceps chain. Because while the posterior musculature, go ahead and get the position again, is responsible for holding this position, the dynamic work from a movement standpoint is being much more so accomplished through the quadriceps chain. All right, go ahead and stand up. Now, by pushing against the resistance again, that emphasizes the primary contributors to the action. Now, if we segue into the upright vertical sprint position, I'll do the other one we talked about. Body is upright. We're still looking for complete extension. However, now, okay, because of the dynamics, more vertical forces are involved. The pushing across the ground that's occurring during the earlier phases of acceleration now is translated into more of this vertically oriented impulse. Obviously, the goal is still to move horizontally across the ground, but the dynamics of muscle function change. So in this case, go ahead and get it again, there's more hamstring chain, okay, involvement, and again, that would be felt with some resistance. For instance, if you were sprinting with a light sled and you put yourself up into that vertical sprint position and you extend it out, you know, it's like, let's say up to 30 meters. As you extended further into that distance, you would feel the activity more so in the hamstring. Of course, without the resistance, there's less of a muscular feeling the farther you get into the sprint because it becomes so much more of a reactive, elastic environment. But the closer you are to overcoming your own inertia, the more muscular effort is involved, which is why even more muscle-bound sprinters can be very competitive in the early acceleration phase and very fast. However, the farther you get out, it becomes less advantageous to be bulky because now we're talking about different dynamic and energetic requirements. Well, let's first make it clear there's nothing more important than perfecting the sprint mechanics in the different positions, acceleration, transition, upright, and so on. However, when we're talking about the level of the athlete, the lower the training age, the less years of physical development, the weaker essentially, then a certain amount of all-encompassed general fitness needs to take place because you can't even hold those positions without your body collapsing. As you progress through the stages of development, different emphasis needs to be instituted in order to become faster. So once we begin to talk about strength exercises to enhance speed of movement, on the topic of hamstring strength, as we talked about, regardless of whether you're in acceleration or the upright position, the hamstrings are functioning as an extensor of the hip. Knee flexion is almost negligible because it's happening during almost more reflexive conditions of driving the knee forward. In terms of volitional hamstring action, flexing the knee is almost neither here nor there in regards to speed work. And so the glute ham raise as popular as it is actually misplaced. So Evan will go ahead and demonstrate. First of all, with the setup, I see so many mistakes performed with this exercise because the distance of the athlete's knee joint is in too close proximity to the pad. This creates a fulcrum too close to the knee, and that's why many, especially larger individuals, will feel more discomfort behind the knee. That's not where you want it. So go get in position. You want the knee to be a few inches behind the pad, and this way, go ahead, the exercise will be felt more in the belly of the muscle where we want it, because we're moving the fulcrum farther away from the knee joint. Just do a few reps. And in this way, you won't be coming all the way up to a 90. You got this, whatever it is, 60-degree angle. This is more in the belly of the knee. Okay, good. Proper way to perform the glute ham raise exercise, I do not suggest it for the purposes of field-based athletes in a speed power context, because there's much more dynamic knee flexion occurring versus hip extension. Essentially, there's more of an isometric responsibility of the hamstrings and, of course, the glutes, the primary extensor of the hip, and the erectors keeping the back flat. Now, if there was more back extension involved in the exercise, then we would have more of this coupled effect of knee flexion, hip extension. But in essence, the knee flexion dominance in terms of the muscular stress with the glute ham raise, I feel, is a conflicting demand in the way that they're functioning with field-based locomotives as a hip extensor. So one of the examples with the reverse hyper here, go ahead and hop up. I personally don't like to use the device with the actual weight of the pendulum, because I feel that too often the subject is being pulled into lumbar flexion under load. I don't think it's a good idea, despite how others claim the benefits. So, of course, it can be performed more strictly, but in terms of economy, what's even faster setup, athlete gets on there and just with partner resistance, so go ahead and come up. Even as strong as the athlete may be, we can get a smoother sort of line of force. And even in the strongest athletes, so we're maintaining, I'm not pushing them back any farther down, he maintains the lower dotted curve, that's quite challenging. You can hop up. And even in the strongest case, I have had, for instance, at the university, I did have certain skill players who had a strength level, and Evan would probably fall in that category, where if he was going all out, I might need two hands. I've had athletes that could actually lift me up off the ground, but by the time we get to that point, we're going beyond the purpose of the exercise, because in this way, as one example only, training the hamstrings as an extensor of the hip, this would still serve more of an auxiliary capacity with respect to a higher level athlete who's faster and stronger. Your primary exercises in that regard would be your RDLs. In my opinion, that's one of the best ones in terms of the extensor of the hip. Of course, the good mornings fall into that category, and pull-throughs and so on. But it's important to understand the function of the musculature, and in the case of these exercises here, not creating conflicting demands with which is already happening on the field. From a muscular dynamic standpoint, important to understand how the muscles are operating when performing the sprint activity, and to understand at those earlier stages of acceleration, which we cannot exclude the upright sprint position from, is in terms of the importance for team sport athletes, because not everything exists purely in the early acceleration phase, particularly in American football. When we look at special teams, when we look at gunners and so on punt teams, kickoff, kick return, if there's an interception and so on, there are more than enough instances of upright running, and so we cannot exclude the speed work alone to acceleration. But that said, it's still important to understand how to optimally train the body in ways other than sprinting and not form conflicting demands.